Hi, I'm John McKee, co-owner, co-founder of Headframe here in Butte, Montana, and I'm going to introduce you to Headframe's continuous flow stills. By the end of this video, you should come to understand a few different things. One is going to be the difference between batch or pot distillation, those phrases get used interchangeably, and continuous flow distillation. You're also going to learn a lot about efficiencies and sustainabilities and those differences in our system versus others. And then finally, we're going to talk about what's just the value to you and your distillery for purchasing one of our systems. So this is a good place to describe the differences between batch or pot distillation and continuous flow distillation. And to sort of get going on that, we have to set up some terms, right? And so in distillation, there are these various phrases called the heads, the hearts, and the tails. And the heads, hearts, and tails are sort of old terminology, but what they are is the heads are these off-putting flavors, sometimes sort of poisonous things that come off the still very early in the run. The hearts are your good flavors. That's what you're looking for when you're making your booze. And then your tails are sort of what's left behind. It's not very good either. It's not poisonous like the heads, but it's not any good in your belly or on your tongue or on your palate either. So it usually gets left behind as well. So this is a really good place to use an analogy to try to get us through what we're talking about here. Well, in a batch still or a pot still, you can think of it as a tea kettle. And so what we're doing is we're taking fermented wash and we're putting that into the tea kettle, but the fermented wash is cold and the tea kettle is cold. So you have to warm the whole volume up. And as it warms up, the first things that come off are the heads. And then the hearts come out. But then what you're left with is this big tea kettle with non-alcoholic fermented wash in it. Like there's no alcohol left because you drove it all out. So what do you have to do? You have to dump out your tea kettle. You have to set it back on heat source and you got to fill it back up with fermented wash again. So you can sort of see from a tea kettle analogy how difficult it can be to run a batch or a pot still. So continuing to use that tea kettle analogy as we talk about continuous flow systems, if you'll remember in the batch side or the pot side, we had to fill it up, boil it, and then dump those tails back out, and then refill it and reheat it. Well, in a continuous flow, keep that tea kettle, but as we're boiling out the heads out of one place and the hearts out of another place and the tails are draining out of the still at the same time, we're feeding it with new fermented wash. So you're not ever turning off the tea kettle. You're not ever dumping it and having to refill and reheat. It just keeps running and we just keep making products. So in batch or pot stilling, there's a couple limitations. One is the size of your pot. How big is it? How much can you get done at once? And then you don't even really make booze the first time. You're doing multiple stripping runs, as they're called, or first runs. So in distillation, a stripping run is about getting rid of water mostly. But when you're done with that stripping run, you still don't have a beverage alcohol. You have to take that, put it back into the still and do what we're called a finishing run or a spirit run and redistill that to get to a beverage alcohol that's worth drinking or putting in a barrel for aging. So the benefit of our continuous system is everything goes through in a single pass. Doesn't matter if you're making a low proof spirit like bourbon or rums or making a high proof spirit like vodka or gin. Anytime you turn on the system with a fermented wash, what comes out the back end is a finished good. And your batch size is determined by the amount of ferment that you have in front of your stills. How many gallons do you have, not how big your still is. And the size of the system isn't measured by how big it is, it's measured by how fast it feeds. The system we're talking about today is a 2 gallon per minute system, which means in about 8 hours, it's gonna feed 1,000 gallons of fermented wash through it. So this means that your biggest limitation is not how big the still is, it's how much ferment you have in front of it. Let's take a look at our flagship still. This is the CF1000 HP, our high proof still. It comes with 2 skids and a control panel, and it can make anything from a low proof spirit all the way up through a neutral required to make vodka. The CF1000 LP, our other offering, is the low proof system. It just comes with a single skid and the control panel, and it makes up to 140 proof spirits. So think of whiskeys, think of low proof rums, think of tequilas and agave spirits. So let me introduce you to the CF1000 HP and its various pieces and parts. You have column 1, which is our stripping column. You have column 2, which we call the barbet, which is a demethylizing or heads removal column. Then you have columns 3 and 4. Those are the rectifying columns. So that's going to take everything up to the high proof, to the neutral level of spirit. We also have 2 gin botanical baskets on the system so that you can change out from one to the other while you're operating. On the front of the system, we have what everybody loves to see when they come to the distillery. We have the parrot. And that's where you're going to see the spirit coming out of the system. Elsewise, all of the other connection points are on the back of the system. So we know that this is usually in line with your utility chases. This point here is where your feed comes into the system. This point is where your stillage or your tails comes out of the system. And this line right here is where the heads come out. The whole system has all of the heat exchangers that it needs in order to operate. It has all the pumps that it needs to operate. So in the world of beverage alcohol, there's this thing called area classification. And sometimes it's referred to as the sombrero of death. And what that means basically is what electrics are allowed in an area that may have the potential for alcohol vapor. Well, one of the things we've done in order to make our system safe for these kinds of areas is we've got an umbilical system that ties from all the pumps and controls on the system to the control panel. And it allows us to get the control panel outside of that area. And it allows us to have a safer operating system. Your primary screen at the control panel is the ops page. This is where you control the operation of the still. We start it up from here, we shut it down from here, we select our recipes from here. This is where you see the trends or the operating conditions of the still. This is how you know it's on what we like to call boots on the desk. This is where we know that it's just running all day and making your spirit all day. Here is where we can take administrative control of certain parts of the still and make a change if you feel a change needs to be made. Here is where the metrics are. This is what tells us how well you're doing. What's your yield today? How much booze have you made today? Here is a system check screen. This is just a way to look at the system and make sure everything's okay. The system has remote capability to it. And so from your office in the same facility, you can see the control screen. You can see how the still's running. And then of course, with your permission, we can turn in remotely. We can assist with troubleshooting or doing additional training for new operators. So the remote system's a really powerful tool with our still. Headframe stills are run from the recipes. The recipes control temperatures and flows, and pressures, and those are really precisely controlled to give you really precise heads, hearts, and tails cuts. In a batch still, what you're doing is you're letting things warm up and your operator's trying to make those choices of when are the heads gone, when are the hearts still there, when are the hearts gone, but those are all temperature related. So on a headframe still, we know where those temperatures are. And the recipe controls the still to make sure those temperatures are making precise and repeatable cuts. So your flavor profile is always exactly where it should be. In the world of distillation, there's two kinds of things you distill. You either distill grain on or grain off. And in our system, you can do both. So if you want to do a grain on wash, there's a mill spec we require such that the grain can pass through the system. And if you want to do a grain off wash, like a lautered or filtered wash, you're welcome to do that too. Let's talk about efficiency and sustainability. So first, we're going to talk about labor or man hours it requires to run our system. In our system, it's very hands-off. You turn it on in the morning, you monitor it throughout the day, make sure everything's okay. You turn it off in the evening. But in the middle of the day, you don't need to be working on this system. So you can think about this a couple of different ways. Either it's giving you more time to do other things, barrel and mash and ferment and follow through on your marketing plan. Or it also allows junior employees an easier chance to run the still for you. And since it runs in a single pass, you're not doing stripping runs and finishing runs. So in 8.5 hours, you've run 1,000 gallons of wash through the system. In comparison, on say a 250-gallon pot still, you're looking at about 3 8-hour days to do the same amount of work. Now let's talk about yield. On a traditional batch or pot still, we talked about that tails cut. Well, typically there's a lot of alcohol left behind in that, sometimes as much as 30 or 40%, and that can be lost in your process. And in a headframe still, we recover about 90% of all of your alcohol, meaning you get more bang for your buck on your yield side. Monthly throughput is a really important factor for our distilleries. How many barrels are you making? So in a fermented wash, depending upon your range, on our still, you're gonna make about 2 to 2.5 barrels of whiskey every day. That translates to about 55 barrels a month, 650 barrels a year, same equivalent in vodka, and all of that's done on a single shift. Let's talk about the consistent nature of production. Because the CF1000 is run off of recipes, you can trust that day to day, month to month, year to year, that the product coming off the still is going to be consistent. You don't have to worry about operators who have different flavor profiles. You don't have to worry about having a head cold that day and missing your cut like people do on pot stills. Our system every single day is going to make the same product it made the day before. And finally, let's talk about utilities. The CF1000 uses about 30% less steam than a traditional pot still at about 500,000 BTUs per hour. Combine that with an efficient closed-loop cooling water system, a well-selected boiler, you're gonna have lower utility rates across the system, a more efficient distillery, and a lower carbon footprint as a result. And it plugs into the same outlet as your microwave at home. So we've covered a lot of ground here on the equipment today. And so we should talk a little bit more about what happens when you buy a system from Headframe. Headframe is a certified B Corporation, the highest designation for a company whose purpose is to create measurable good in the world. We focus our efforts on building equipment which helps people across the world build more efficient, sustainable distilleries and make positive impacts in their own communities. You're buying equipment made here in Butte, Montana by our employees. We're a proud American manufacturer. And when you buy a system from us, you're buying your system. We're making it for you. And when we're done with that and when we've delivered it, the thing you're also getting from us when you buy a system from us is you're getting us. You're getting our team to help you long-term with the operation of your distillery. When you buy a still from us, we take that responsibility seriously because it's the largest financial investment you're gonna make in your distillery. During the time we're building it, you'll be getting regular updates from us. We'll give you clear and concise contractual language so you know what to expect from us and what we expect from you. And in the end, we'll be there. We'll do the install and we'll stay behind and train you on how to use it. If you're a pre-existing distillery, we're gonna help set up the recipes such that what comes off the still is gonna be instantly recognizable to you and your customers. If you're a new distillery, we're gonna help you develop your recipes so you don't have to start from scratch. We're here for you after training as well. We have online support content, we have inventory of spare parts on hand for you, and we have a team that's here to assist you to make sure that the still is working as hard as you are. Thank you for watching this video. Check out more of our content or reach out to us anytime.